Well, since we're a couple minutes past the hour, I guess we'll get things started. We're going to be recording this webinar today. Just want to give everyone a heads up on that. We'll hit the record button now. Yeah, just wanted to give everyone a heads up. Okay, so thanks so much for joining us at our at ESS-DIVE's March webinar. Hopefully you all can see my screen. Emily, do you see my screen being shared? Great, thanks. Mm-hmm. So wanted to welcome you all to our March webinar on data package quality review, which is going to be led today by Emily and myself. And Emily, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm Emily Robles. I'm a data management assistant with ESS-DIVE, and I'm really excited to talk about our review process and give a few guidelines on how to make revisions to your data package and your metadata.
And Emily is going to start off the webinar today, but I'll introduce myself and show us the agenda briefly. But my name's Rob Crystal Ornelas. I'm a postdoc working with ESS-DIVE, and I focus on data reporting formats and data standardization, which I'll introduce you all to towards the end of the webinar today. So again, thanks so much for joining, and we're happy to answer questions that you might have in the chat or throughout the presentation. So just to give you a quick overview of what we're going to talk about today, we're going to first walk through some elements to consider when building your own data package for submission to ESS-DIVE, publishing high quality data on ESS-DIVE, and those first two components are going to be led by Emily. And then I'll join in at the end to talk about how to make the data that you're publishing to ESS-DIVE more reusable with some of these data reporting formats and metadata reporting formats. And I think the bold point here, the baseline that we want to convey to you today is that we're here to support you in submitting your data to ESS-DIVE. So we want you to feel comfortable and supported throughout this whole process, and hopefully this webinar helps you along that path. So turning things back over to Emily.
Perfect. Thanks, Rob. So first, I want to just briefly go over building a data package. We're not going to go too far into organization, but deciding what to include in a data package can be difficult, especially if you have a large quantity of data or data of multiple types. So we recommend considering a few main factors to help determine how to package your data and whether multiple data packages may be necessary. Move ahead. So the first rule of thumb is that generally data related to a publication should be packaged together, and this enables easy citation, and users will be able to quickly access all data that went into a publication. If your data is not currently related to a publication, we recommend first considering your authors. So determine who will be the first author on a data package and avoid long combinations of teams by dividing where appropriate. And when adding authors to ESS-DIVE data packages, we want to remind you that the order in which you add your authors does matter, and that will be the order that they appear in citations. So next, data of the same type, for example, sensor or sample data, generally should be packaged together as well. And finally, considering the scale of your data. So depending on the data type, this could be the temporal scale or the geographic scale of your data. And dividing data into multiple packages may not always be necessary. Always keep in mind the data user's experience and what you think the most useful combination of data will be. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out anywhere in this process. So as I said, we're not going to walk through organizing data files or the entire ESS-DIVE publication process today. So we've included some resources here, and these slides will be posted on our website following the webinar so that you can access these links. So moving ahead to publishing quality metadata. High quality metadata are essential to the longevity and usability of data. So next we're going to cover ESS-DIVE's expectations for metadata, as well as our two-part review workflow and how to improve your metadata after receiving feedback from this review process. So why focus on metadata? FAIR, the widely used acronym that we're likely mostly familiar with by now. It stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And these have been recognized as core components of high quality data. And so while public data archival policies from journals and funding organizations have increase the amount of data being published within the environmental sciences, making that data fair is a much larger issue to tackle. And creating complete and high quality metadata is one way to make data more fair. So ESS-DIVE has metadata requirements that must be met before approval for publication. And we're going to run through those now. So before we jump in, I just want to mention that multiple tools are available to help guide you in creating metadata for your data package. Our package level metadata guide contains everything you need to understand each field in our submission form and specific criteria that need to be met for data package publication are included, as well as examples for each field. And we recommend checking out this page before you get started on your metadata, as these are the exact criteria that we use in our data package review process. And if you're working with a team to publish a data package and want to collaborate with multiple authors or data managers on your metadata, we recommend using our offline metadata template, and the link is also included in these slides for that. The template is in a Google Doc format, allowing you to easily copy it to your drive, and you can share it with your team. And once it's finalized, each field can be directly transferred over to the corresponding field on the ESS-DIVE data package submission form. So moving on. So ESS-DIVE has a two-part review system that has decreased publication review time since its implementation. And it's crucial as ESS-DIVE begins to receive higher volumes of publication requests. And first, our automated review allows you to be a part of your data package curation. And then following your request for publication, a thorough manual review focused on content-related checks is performed to ensure that metadata meets all ESS-DIVE requirements. These two steps also offer feedback to the data contributor in two different ways. So the results of the automated checks run on each data package are combined into a metadata assessment report, which you'll see in a moment. And feedback from the manual review process are sent directly to data contributors through email. Perfect. So taking a look at our metadata assessment report, it's generated after a series of automated checks are run on a data package. And these include checks like title and abstract length and the presence of complete author contact information. And this report helps to expedite the publication review process by allowing data contributors to preview the quality of their metadata and make revisions before requesting publication. So these checks are actually run after submitting your metadata. So before requesting publication, before the manual review, before anyone at ESS-DIVE looks at it. So if you could just... Perfect. So this is what a metadata assessment report will look like. And as you can see, it assigns a percentage score for the categories identification, discovery, and interpretation, which are based on the FAIR principles, but tailored specifically to ESS-DIVE. So you can review your data package's assessment report after submitting, as I said, although it may take a few hours to be generated, meaning that you can review your failed checks before requesting publication. Again, we highly recommend reviewing and attempting to resolve as many of these failed checks as possible, as it significantly decreases the amount of time spent in the review process and leads to faster approval of your data package. Also note that metadata assessment reports will also be accessible to data users once your data package has been published. So moving on to the manual review process. So these are focused on content checks. So it's important to remember that metadata fields may pass the automated check process, but fail the manual review. And so it's important to review our requirements. That was our GitHub link, which I believe Joan included in the chat to our metadata guide. And all failed checks must be resolved before approval for publication. And feedback from this metadata review form is sent to the data contributor over email. Go. So this is an example of what that email may look like. A revision request will detail each change needed for the data package to be approved for publication. And after the data contributor has updated their metadata, the review process will repeat until the metadata is finalized and the data package is approved for publication. So this is a cyclical process with each version of revisions that are done to the data package to include or to meet revision requests. There's going to be another review, a manual review done by the ESS-DIVE team. Perfect. So these fields, title, abstract, keywords and variables, and methods are the most common areas that we request improvement in after review. And these will often pass the automated checks for presence and length, but frequently fail the content-related manual checks. So we're going to walk through these fields individually to give some insight into what can cause a failed check and how to improve them. So first off, our titles. A descriptive title is an essential component of your data package, and it's your first introduction to data users. We recommend a title that's between 7 to 20 words long, which includes information such as the topic, geographic location, dates, and the scale of your data. And in this format of slides, you can see on the good category, the words that are in blue are the checks that are done automatically. So these are the checks that will show up in your metadata assessment report. So for your title, if the data is associated with a journal publication, the title may include the journal name if you would like. And if there's an existing DOI for the data, we ask that you use the same title for citation consistency. And mistakes that can cause a failed check with a title are unexplained acronyms or project-specific vocabulary that could be confusing to data users. If there's any acronyms that you feel are necessary to include, we ask that you explain those clearly and thoroughly in the data package abstract. Perfect. So next, moving on to the abstract, it's often what determines whether a data user can identify your data package as useful, and therefore it's important to include enough information for users to make this determination without having to download and look through all of your files. This is also a field that commonly has the most errors, including a lack of detail, incomplete sentences, or again, undefined acronyms or project-specific terminology. A good abstract is clear and contains all information necessary to convey the purpose for and content of your data package. So next, we're going to look at an example of a very thorough abstract. So some specific details we look for in each abstract. We review our clear purpose, a general introduction to your methods, and a description of the files within your data package and any software that may be necessary to access or utilize them if necessary. And a list of details to include here are, it might seem like I'm rambling off a lot of requirements, but we all have these listed in our metadata documentation again. But at the end of the day, you know your data best. If there are details that you believe are critical to the understanding of your research, please include them, even if they fall outside the scope of our recommendations. So next, relevant keywords and variables. This is very often a field that will pass our automated review, but not manual review. So all terms within ESS-DIVE metadata fields are searchable. However, keywords and variables remain among the most important fields for dataset searches. So to make your data more findable, we use unique keywords and variables that are not present in your data package title. And we require that data contributors include at least 3 of these terms that differ from your title. And we also recommend that you include expanded versions of acronyms in addition to the original entry. So if you think that an entry or acronym is more likely to be searched for, you can include that as a keyword, but we ask that you also expand that acronym as a separate keyword. And controlled terms can be useful for finding multiple data sets with similar data. So we offer GCMD controlled vocabulary as an option for keywords, which you'll see in a moment on the next slide. So this is what the keywords field looks like in the data package submission form. They're entered using a search bar that auto-completes as you type, and it offers a list of those GCMD controlled vocabulary to choose from. If you are choosing from these keywords, make sure to check that each term across the hierarchy is applicable to your research. So as you can see, there's kind of, moving from earth sciences to agriculture, and then finally having the most specific term. So if you were to enter that final term first, we just ask that you check all terms before it and make sure that those are still applicable because they may differ. And then you also have the option to enter keywords manually if you would like. And on the next slide, you'll see an example of how those differ. So yeah, this is an example of how your keywords, GCMD and manual, will appear to users. And we recommend you don't have to use one or the other. We actually recommend using both, using GCMD where applicable and where possible. And if you have terms that lie outside of that controlled vocabulary, then also including those. But again, being clear in your keywords, avoiding any misspelling, and yeah, just having unique keywords to increase the findability of your data package. Okay, method section. So your method section should contain all essential information for others to reproduce your work, conduct resurvey studies, understand if your data is useful in other contexts, and evaluate the scientific integrity of your work. A complete method section will improve the findability of your data package. As I said earlier, terms within this field will be searchable. And all text entered will be searchable through the ESS-DIVE search filters for users. However, if desired, you can provide a citation for any methods that were published previously, but we strongly recommend tailoring these methods so that the steps specific to data production are still included within this field. So on the next slide, you'll see an example of this. So it might be a little bit difficult to see, but again, these slides will be available in PDF format for you to maybe take a closer look at. This is an example of a very thorough method section. There was actually way more text in it, and I kind of condensed it a bit. But the main idea is that the authors introduce the relationship to a publication, but they still include methods that are tailored to data production. And these methods are sectioned where appropriate and written in full sentences and very clear to the data user. So those are all of the examples that I have. Again, these are the most failed fields during our manual review process. So I strongly recommend taking a look at these again to read over them a little bit more. And again, we have linked our metadata guide and a few other webinars that we've done walking through the submission and review process again. And then also just including some best practices for the organization of your data. So I'm going to pass it over to Rob now, who is going to talk about a very exciting tool that ESS-DIVE is creating, or tools rather, that are going to really help the reproducibility of data. I think we may have a comment in the chat as well.
Yeah, great. If there's any questions before I, well, I'll go to the next slide, but before I carry on, yeah, if anyone has questions and wants to ask Emily or unmute and ask, yeah, we can do that. We can take a minute for that now for sure.
I just put my comment in the chat, but I can say it as well. Yeah, so it was just regarding the keywords and the GCMD options. I know for myself, the first time I've submitted or tried to submit a data package, I thought I needed to pick one of those terms, and none of them really fit with what I wanted to put in there. And so I picked something that didn't really match, or I thought, well, if there's none that match, I can't pick a keyword. So it's a little unclear, just the instructions for that. Since then, I've understood that I can put in my own words and, and that's fine. But yeah, it would just be good to clarify that in the way that it's written, because it's a little ambiguous.
Yeah, that's very helpful. We can definitely try to clarify that a bit more in our recommendations. That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Kristen. Any other comments or questions?
So another misunderstanding, or rather we didn't clarify enough about the GCMD keywords. Yeah, so they are recommended, but not required, definitely not required.
Great, thanks for the comments and feedback, everyone. That's really helpful to hear from you all. Okay, and thanks, Emily. I'm gonna carry on here, and yeah, feel free to add in questions for Emily in the chat, and we'll have time at the end to discuss further, I believe. So, okay, so I'm excited to share with you all today some details about data reporting formats. Define those a little bit if you haven't heard about them yet. These data reporting formats, I do want to say, are being developed in partnership with a lot of our community partners, some of whom are on the call. So yeah, excited to share that with you all and how they may relate to your data that you're submitting to ESS-DIVE. So the data that we collect as earth and environmental scientists are really complex, and I thought we could start off by taking a look at this one picture of the East River in Colorado, and each of us could probably generate a pretty long list of the types of data we might collect from this one segment of one watershed, right? We might collect soil or water samples from the river. We might compile a list of tree species in the surrounding watershed to calculate some diversity metrics, or we might try to quantify carbon flux from the soil. And as my points on this slide explained here, or the first one, and some of this that little brainstorming exercise kind of illustrates, is that the data in earth and environmental science are really diverse. There are lots of data types, and those data types come in lots of different formats. The second point on my slide here is this question I'll focus on mostly during the webinar today, which is how can we make these really diverse data that we collect in the field or in labs or from models reusable by other scientists? A key ingredient to reusable data is a place to archive the data long-term. And ESS-DIVE provides DOE scientists that centralized location to archive their environmental research data for long-term preservation, and also the ability to sort of like publicly release the data. And And for the rest of this webinar, I'm going to kind of focus on that reusability piece of the question here. As you heard from Emily in the first part of our webinar today, there are lots of different points during the data archiving process at ESS-DIVE where we help you to make the data you collect in the field or lab as fair as possible, for example, by wrapping the data that you collect in descriptive metadata. This is one way to make data more findable by users through our search interface at ESS-DIVE. The part of the FAIR acronym that's been the most challenging for scientists to address broadly is reusability. In other words, can another researcher not only locate and download your data, but can understand that data and reuse it in their own analysis? One study that looked at reusability suggests that upwards of 60% of the data stored in more general repositories might face some reusability issues due to data sets being incomplete, corrupt file formats, or insufficient metadata. So a challenge that we're taking on at ESS-DIVE and that I'll be chatting about today is how to make that data stored in ESS-DIVE more reusable. And one solution towards the reusability goal is to make sure data are well described and consistently formatted. This call for fairer data sets is echoed by our recent paper. I just want to highlight by some of our colleagues down at UC Berkeley who emphasized that there's so many different possible analyses and applications for the hard work that all of you scientists, do out in the field or in the lab. And if you conducted any research in grad school, this might resonate with you a bit. You can probably remember the spreadsheets full of data that may have gone unanalyzed due to sheer lack of time and resources. So I think this is just like another interesting motivation about why making our data packages and the data files in them as understandable and reusable might be beneficial to science more broadly. Here I'll provide a quick illustration of the power of data standardization with a really pared down example for illustration purposes. Let's say we have a couple of scientists that went out into the field, collected some samples at their field sites. Scientists on the left collected soil and water samples, and so did the scientist on the right. However, you'll notice that while we're dealing with the same materials here, I highlight them here, the same materials and the same sort of variables, those column names aren't standardized, nor are the terms used within the material column. You have one scientist calling what they collected groundwater and another calling it ground liquid. Now, had these two scientists standardized their water collection data sets, you can see how we can instantly recognize that similar materials can be found across the two data sets, and having that standardized column names will more quickly sort of orient us to what types of data they're collecting. Also, if you plan to use any coding tools to synthesize the data in both of these tables, having those standardized column names will make your synthesis more efficient. And you can imagine how this can be like scaled up and save lots more time when we're dealing with dozens or hundreds of different data sets. What I showed you on a couple of previous slides is an example of data standardization, which is also called data harmonization. Before I go any further, I'll define a couple of terms that you might have heard before. Data standards are typically thought of as policies and procedures that guide how we represent our data. They're typically accredited by large governing bodies. Some examples you might have heard of are Darwin Core and ISO standards. Data reporting formats, which I'll focus on in this presentation, are guidelines for formatting data that are typically more community-led and grassroots efforts at formatting data in a more consistent way. So a major focus of our community engagement team here at ESS-DIVE has been getting the scientific community involved in developing these community-led data reporting formats. Over the past couple of years, we've worked with 6 teams of community partners at different national labs to develop reporting formats for some of that diverse data generated by ESS-DIVE users, ranging from soil respiration data to leaf physiology to amplicon sequencing data. We envision these reporting formats making data in ESS-DIVE more useful because, for example, anyone that's submitting soil respiration data to ESS-DIVE that follows that reporting format will make synthesis, meta-analysis, and just general data integration much more efficient. And I want to highlight that in the process of creating these data reporting formats, all of these different teams reviewed existing formats, where they existed for their different domains. They received several rounds of feedback from their research community and different projects related to the types of data they're creating the formats for. And now all of their documentation supporting these reporting formats lives on our community space on the website GitHub. So as I mentioned on the previous slide, many of the community-led reporting formats and their documentation can be found on this community space on GitHub. And if you visit the link that's pictured here on the slide, and which hopefully we can also post to the chat, you'll be able to find the set of reporting formats that are either in the development phase or that are ready to use. This is a screenshot of what the landing page in our community space looks like. And by clicking those blue links, you'll access the individual GitHub sites that are specific to each reporting format. I'll show you what the page for the CSV reporting format looks like now. I won't go into too much more detail about navigating through the GitHub interface during this webinar, but very happy to chat after or answer any questions you might have. But here's what the typical GitHub page for a reporting format looks like. This one, again, is for the CSV reporting format. And if you were to scroll down this landing page, you would see the rest of its README file or the README page, which will provide you all of the most important information about the reporting format, tell you about the different files contained within this GitHub page. And you'll find, and I highlight it here, a quick guide, which provides the recommendations and suggestions for how to prepare your data to this CSV reporting format for submission to ESS-DIVE. And I introduced you to the kind of wide variety of reporting formats that our community partners are creating. And some of them are more tailored to researchers collecting a certain type of data, for example, hydrologic data, collecting sediment samples, while others, like this CSV reporting format, are applicable to anyone submitting tabular data, like in a spreadsheet. So I'll use some example data pictured along the bottom of the slide here to walk us through a brief demonstration of how you can start to move any of your already existing data into the recommended reporting format. A first step, of course, is visiting the GitHub page for this reporting format, checking out the documentation and guidelines. And I'll just point out two of their recommendations and show you how they sort of work with this example. The first is the recommendation for how to create different column names or that header row in your spreadsheet. And they recommend to make those names as descriptive as possible and to only in the names use letters, numbers, hyphens, and underscores. So you can see how I've gone from, on the left side, the header pictured in red that doesn't adhere to the reporting format because it's got a space in between site and name and a space in between daily and temp. And now on the right side of in the right table, you see the underscore separating site and name and the underscore separating daily and temp, and that now adheres to the reporting format's recommendations. And why does this small change matter? Well, we want the data not only to be human readable and understandable, but eventually we want that data to also be machine readable, which is a major component of making data fairer. And our reporting formats were developed with this machine readability in mind. And this slight change of changing the space to an underscore makes the data more easily read by different computer programs, for example. Next, we'll look at their recommendations for how to indicate missing values. First, they specify that no cells in the spreadsheet should be blank, and that if you're missing any numeric data, you indicate that missing numeric data with a -9999 in place of any missing numeric, and a n/a in the place of any missing text. Now, the spreadsheet on the left, or that example on the left, doesn't follow the recommendations because it uses the word missing for missing data, and it uses the zip code of Berkeley Lab for the missing numeric data. Now, on the right, you see that by switching the recommendation to NA, or n/a rather, and -9999 for the missing numeric, the spreadsheet now adheres to the recommendations by the CSV reporting format. And there are indeed about like 6 or 8 other recommendations from the CSV reporting format, but this is just to hopefully show you that even converting your already existing data that you might still be in the process of collecting and working on to the reporting format is a relatively straightforward process. And the effort by our community partners has resulted in reporting formats that can help you make your data more reusable. We certainly encourage you to see which reporting formats fit your data types. The reporting formats in this upper left-hand corner are more broadly applicable across different research topics. So CSV reporting format is the one I showed us an example of, but there's also reporting formats about sample identifiers and metadata and model data recommendations. This next set here are more domain-specific reporting formats. And then the last section highlights a reporting format that encourages researchers to describe all the different files that they're including as part of their full data package that they're submitting to ESS-DIVE. Lastly, I just want to emphasize that there's much more to explore in the community space on GitHub, and those documents are being updated as currently. And most importantly, I just want to emphasize that we're here to help and answer questions as you start to begin to work with these reporting formats to make your data reusable. And with that, I want to thank you all for attending. And we're really happy to take any questions you might have. And since I'm sharing, I can't quite see any questions if they've come up in the chat. So nothing yet. Okay.
Yes, this is Charu. It might help if Joan and Emily, you both explain sort of the process for which the metadata criteria were developed as part of the quality review, and sort of the rationale for why we have chosen certain metadata fields and what we are requiring for those metadata fields.
Yeah, I can give an overview of what we did for that, and Emily can chime in too, because she did a lot of the work in helping to come up with those as well. So I think it was in 2018 and early 2019, we were looking at specific metadata requirements and also requirements that just relevant journals had for things like title and abstract and methods. And so we reviewed current requirements across these journals and then also other data repositories, and started to develop like a specific list of what we thought would be reasonable for checking package metadata for ESS-DIVE. And then in addition to that, Data One and NCEAS, the National Center for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis, they had another project where they were developing the automated checks that ended up really being focused on specific criteria that you could check automatically to support the FAIR principles. So they have a set of checks, automated checks for that, and we reviewed those specific checks to determine which ones would be relevant for our package level metadata. And really those were focused on the findability criteria. And so we compiled a list of specific requirements for both just the presence and absence of certain fields and the word counts, and those were the automated checks, and then also specific content requirements for these metadata fields. And we compiled these and sent them out to the community to review. And then we also did a webinar to get additional feedback on those. So I don't know, Emily, do you have any other things to add to that?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good overview of everything. Another thing, so it was myself and another data management assistant, Zareen, that were doing kind of the overviews of, looking at different journal requirements and also different repository requirements. And Zareen and I are both undergraduates. And so looking at different data packages and kind of thinking about what confused us and what we didn't understand necessarily, and what we thought was important to be clarified, really helped with those content related checks that are in the manual review process. So those were definitely, sorry, there's a train going by, definitely a process that we went through. It wasn't all at once. We kind of generated them throughout a very long time and multiple rounds of feedback. But yeah, they were based off of what we thought would be useful or most useful for the data users. Yeah, and then Kristen mentioned in the chat as well that if anyone's interested in providing feedback for the reporting formats, please reach out, and that we're looking for people to do testing on the reporting formats. And she left her email as well if anyone would like to reach out.
Yeah, great. Thanks for bringing that up, Kristen, and offering for people to contact you about that. We are having definitely the first few groups of people starting to work with the reporting formats, and it's been a really, it's been really helpful to see where they might have questions about the documentation, and where we can sort of go back and forth with the team developing them to help just make documentation clearer or accommodate their data type a little bit better. So yeah, more feedback is always welcome on them.
Emily, I also want to ask you to maybe comment on, since you're doing a lot of the review process, how you're finding that the review times are decreasing as people get more comfortable with the metadata requirements and with responding to some of the changes that we do. So over time, the improvement on the quality of the metadata. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I can actually share my screen really quickly and kind of give a look. So basically the manual review process uses a Google form that I showed kind of briefly. And this is where all of those answers go. So as you can see, each manual check is listed, and then everything is scored on a pass-fail basis. And then these responses are the standardized feedback that is sent in the email back to the data contributor for review. And then after, in that same Google form, we also have a post-review assessment where the ESS-DIVE reviewer will enter how much time they spent on that review. And so we do have our review time statistics that are updated every single month. And as you can see, they've been going down, which is great. And this is really, well, first of all, it is a result of the automated review implementation, but also it's a result of contributors who have submitted data multiple times and are familiar with our review process and are familiar with the feedback that they normally get. And we have found that data contributors who submit multiple times have actually had increased scores. And so we also take the automated quality scores and record these here. And yeah, so we've been keeping track of those over time when they are available. But yeah, so our review review time has definitely been going down. And as you can see, these are the main focus areas. So if there are any issues, if a data package takes a longer amount of time to review, then we also ask in the post-review assessment that the reviewer list what field it was that took them the longest amount of time. And so this kind of helps us revise, think about what could be included in the automated checks to improve that review time. And some of these can't be included in the automated review process. So the abstract and the methods, those content related checks, looking specifically at data files and reviewing the data file types. But as you can see, keyword revisions is one thing that pops up a lot. And that's a fairly easy check for people to revise on their own. But yeah. Oh yeah, and then we also have the pass and fail statistics for each check that is continually updated. And yeah, so you can see that particularly non-proprietary file formats are failed quite often. Abstract content is another one that's failed, and methods content and keywords. So that's why we decided to include those in our webinar today.
Can I ask a question about the non-proprietary formats? Because I've submitted packages where I've included CSV files and everything in a non-proprietary format, but I've also included like an Excel file with it compiled for clarity for those who can read it and want to read it. But then that would fail the test, right? The automatic test.
No, so there is no automatic test right now for the file format. So that's something that's done during the manual review, looking at those file types. And we do, so initially you likely will receive a revision request for file formats, but we prefer CSV files, but if you have the original version in Excel file format or whatnot, but you also include those CSV and non-proprietary file formats, we do allow those. So those would not be a fail necessarily.
Yeah, I'm just, I guess for your your sake, is there a way to get around that so that in submitting the package, you could explicitly say, yes, I'm including this Excel file, but it only contains a compilation of all of these CSV files that I'm also including in the package so that it will lessen your burden.
Yeah, so that is where very descriptive abstracts come in handy, because I do read through each of those and an explanation of what is in the data packages and saying, I've included the original data in Excel format, but also in CSV format. That's something that I would be able to identify and say, okay, I probably don't need to send them the revision request for file formats. But yeah,
another way you can communicate with Emily even before she gets to her review step, when you hit the publish button, you'll receive an automated email shortly after, and you can reply to that email, and anything that you write that's the beginning of an email chain directly with Emily. So you can make sure any notes that you might have about that she should look towards in her review, that she'll have that information.
Okay, that's helpful. It might be worthwhile just making that more publicly available so that, this is just for your sake, because I do want to streamline this process as much as possible, and any of these little tricks is helpful for people to know. So, but
yeah.
Thanks, that's helpful.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Fiona. Kind of including in our initial message that if you have any, circumstances that you would like to disclose or any specifics about your data, that you can reply to that email. And that's kind of where we get into how familiarity with the revision process can really expedite future publication by the same data contributor. Like, I know, Kristen, you're gonna look out for me on that one now, and your publication processes will probably be much quicker now. So, hopefully we try to cover as much as we can in our documentation and our help documentation, our tutorials, and whatnot, but definitely nothing can truly replace being familiar with the process and having gone through it yourself. So that's a good point. Sure.
This is Terry. I hope you could hear. I'm on headphones. Can you tell us a little bit more about what the user workshop is going to cover in May? Should I be sending that out to everybody on my project to attend that? Or how many people are you trying to reach with that? And is it going to be more detailed than, like today, you went over really good with details about the metadata assessment, which will be good for people to know, but just a little bit more about that user workshop and who you intend to have us invite.
Yeah, it would be great if you could invite anyone who may submit data to ESS-DIVE or you use ESS-DIVE. We sent out a save the date to all of our users and everyone on our community list. So that's already set for May 24th and 25th, and it'll be 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. with breaks Pacific time. And then, so we're generally gonna, I'm working on an agenda now. We did ask for feedback. So if anyone is, can provide feedback. Can someone find the link to that form? Let's see. I can try to find that before we
I'll find it, Joan. Why don't you explain the?
Yeah, so we're generally planning to start with kind of an overview of ESS-DIVE features and our vision, and we may have a session on like your data management plan and what to expect from ESS-DIVE. We're hoping to have one session with lightning talks, where we'll invite speakers from some of the major projects and hopefully get some university projects to share some information on the data that they collect in kind of 5-minute pre-recorded presentations. And then a session on reusing published ESS data, some of the challenges that people are having, and the promise of that, what we want for the future to make data more reusable. And then a session on how the community is starting to use some of our reporting formats. And then we'll have some tutorials, specifically a more basic tutorial on how to use ESS-DIVE for search and download using our web interface. And then a concurrent session on uploading data to ESS-DIVE programmatically. Yeah, so those are some of our general plans. And if you have any, if you're willing to give a presentation, let me know. Or if you have any specific suggestions, because we are still finalizing the agenda there, and it would be great to get some more feedback. So yeah, our general goal for the meeting is to start to develop more of a broader ESS data community and have people like share their data and how they manage data, and how they might reuse this, some of our community data.
Can I ask a general question about, so I've worked with a lot of, DOE proposals, writing proposals in the past. So this is like the first year that we've had to start including like ESS-DIVE and NMDC, all these things in our data management plans. But it's not quite clear how we will use those together. Like if we have microbiome data, do we? So I don't know, I guess it's a general question, because I'm wondering if you're going to have like a webinar about using different things together? Like, do we put our microbiome data in ESS-DIVE and in MDC? That sort of thing. So how do we use these fair, kind of these new data repositories together going forward? Is kind of confusing for us right now, you know, or do we put all the geochemical data in ESS-DIVE and then it's linked to an NMDC?
Yeah, that would be
data
the
set?
that would be the general recommendation right now, is to
Okay.
publish more of the non-microbiome data would go into ESS-DIVE. So your geochemical data would go there, and then the microbiome data would go to the like JGI or NMDC. And yeah, so the general plan is to eventually have better linkages across like different data systems.
Mhm. Okay.
Add a little bit more to Joan's answer here. And I think that it actually depends on what type of data it
Mhm.
is, and how much of the data you want to keep together as part of your project. There are projects where they want to put the microbiome data in ESS-DIVE because the rest of their project's data is there, and that's okay. It depends on your funding source, and if your funding source is requiring it to be an NMDC or not, and not necessarily all funding sources require that, even across BER. So we're leaving it to the contributors in some way to decide, you know, where's the best place to put the data. If you know, sequence data may better fit in NMDC, but there's a lot of data that may not fit there.
Right.
And we will take everything. So, you know, if you want just your project's collection to all be in one place, and we have these project portals now that are capable of showcasing your entire project's data, then maybe it's, you know, it's just better to put it here. But as Joan mentioned, sort of the linkages with other repositories is something we are thinking about, and we would love to get feedback on certain use cases that you all have. But it's not a feature we're going to enable like in the next year or so. It'll take a little while to figure out exactly how people want to link different repositories and different data sets within different repositories. But we are aware that it is a need.
Yeah, and we do have a related references field, so you can put links to related data sets there.
Okay. Yeah, because so I work at Livermore, you know, on these big DOE SFAs. So we work with KBase, some sequencing stuff with JGI. So like this data is kind of already in a lot of places, but it's for our own sanity too. We do want to get it all in one spot. So I mean, I'd be willing. You guys can reach out to me and other people. Like I noticed Nancy Marina was on one of the papers you.
Yeah, that would be great to get some of your feedback on what might be needed there.
Yeah, because we're trying to navigate. How do we use all this? And
yeah, it might be worth, Joan, for us to think about this as a particular topic, as for a breakout discussion also in the user workshop. If there are enough people within the community who are facing this problem and are interested in this topic, I think it is worth thinking about.
yeah, I'd be interested. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, we're at noon here Pacific. So I just want to thank you all. Oh, and Bob's added a question in here. Great. Yeah. Thanks for that comment, Bob. And I want to just thank you all for joining. Thanks for your comments, questions, feedback. We really appreciate you taking the time to attend and to give your insight throughout the presentation. So we'll share our slides. We'll post the recorded webinar as well. And thanks for adding your email in there, Jeff. Yeah, thanks so much, everyone. We'll see you at our April webinar, hopefully. Thanks, everyone. Bye.